Well, with the upcoming potential for hopefully some changes to Commander, I've postponed playing it today. Plus, it was the 4th of July and I was having fun with my family. So I did play some Vintage though after they went to bed, and I continue to refine the deck. This is the current iteration here. I finally got my 4 Wastelands thanks to the success of the Brea deck, allowed me to pick those up. Turns out the foil ones are less or barely more than the regular one, which was a nice surprise. So hopefully, I guess that'll be the next goal, is to slowly make it all foil so that I can sort my cards that I want to trade if I crack treasure chests without including those. So I've got a long way to go before I worry about that. But anyway, we'll run through some vintage games. This is a mana destruction deck. The whole goal of this deck is to the reason it doesn't run Mind Twist like classic the deck builds does is that it runs Crucible of Worlds. That's the Mind Twist for this deck. Basically, the goal is to completely deny your opponent access to any mana whatsoever, and then just build up counter spells. And you either beat them with Jace, the Mind Sculptor, or repeated smacks with Gorilla Shamans. If you have Moat out, you'll have to disenchant your Moat, of course. Or you can beat them with Dak Faden, and you just keep targeting them. They have no mana, so it's basically just spins them through their deck very quickly. And although it does allow them to build up a hand to potentially run out like maybe a bunch of Mox's Lotus and some big play, you don't start doing that until you've already accumulated so many counters that there's no possible way that they could ever recover from the situation. So let's take a look at some of the games. I did lose one today. Oh, I meant to check out the sideboard. I'm sorry. Before we get to all that. So in the sideboard, I have one plains because my sideboard's very white. And I want to have a basic plains in case I'm actually still running main deck tithe, so I want to have a basic plains in case so that I can tithe for it. If my opponents are trying to beat me with Blood Moon, so I go up to 4 disenchants and then tithe for basic plains is the solution there. So I've got Humility, a second moat in the Abyss. So the main deck moat is my response to the Dredge deck, as well as Shops. Both of those decks have an extremely difficult time trying to beat the moat, and it's why I don't have Swords to Plowshares or Balance in the main, because in general, the game is strictly about going to get moat and putting it into play against those decks as fast as I can, and Swords to Plowshares doesn't help me do that. But in the sideboard, I have 4 Swords to Plowshares in case there's a deck that I run up against where it seems useful. I haven't sideboarded them in yet, but I would bring them in if I were to play against Shops. Oh, I guess that's the exception. I have sideboarded them against Shops, where you bring in 4 swords, 2 disenchants, a moat, and a humility, and then possibly even a toxic deluge against them. So against Dredge, you'd bring in humility, moat, not the abyss. But there are decks that try to win with creatures. Like there's a humans deck that uses Cavern of Souls to make all of their creatures uncounterable, and it's a nightmare to face in game one. Basically, this deck is complete dog to try to beat that because while you can wasteland their land, their cavern, pretty easily, the problem is once their creatures get on the board, they all have effects that will beat you, that deal damage to you whenever you activate abilities and stuff like that. Makes it nearly impossible to win, if not impossible in game one. So in game two, you get swords, deluge, abyss, humility, and not as worried about moats. So that's one of the decks where the abyss would come in. So anyway, and then if you are playing against like a fast combo deck like Oath of Druids, then you would bring in both Disenchants, the Pyroblast, and then Humility, and potentially Tinker Colossus because you can you can always try to just outrace them. Tinker Colossus is also something you can bring in against decks that aren't interactive that just try to beat you as quickly as they can. You know, you bring in your defenses, and if you have extra slots, then that's a possibility as well. Those 2 sideboard slots, Tinker Colossus is not really like set in stone or anything. It very well may not make the cut long term. So we can finally check out some games. And so I'm going to go into my game history, date and time, played today. All I played was vintage today, as you can see. Format. Okay, so I won all but one. Unfortunately, and I do apologize, most of my games seem to be against the exact same deck type. It appears to be what my opponents want to play. Now, throughout the course of this, I was kind of refining a couple of different cards. So I think in the beginning, a couple cards are slightly different. But for the most part, the deck is as you saw. So we'll play through the games today and then call it a wrap. All right, so I had to mulligan my first hand. It was just complete garbage. I don't know what I'm facing yet. It is apparently, this is apparently a paradoxical outcome. So I may lose the game on turn one because he's got Time Vault, and if he has Key, I'm just dead. I have no defenses. But I kept my hand because I had a Mox Ruby to go with Gorilla Shaman. I have Dak Faden and Strip Mine. So I have a super disruptive hand for most decks. And my opponent does not kill me on turn one. I drew one of my 2 disenchants as well. So this deck runs 2 disenchants, 2 Gorilla Shamans, and a Dak Faden, just to reflect what the format's about. So I go ahead and eat his Black Lotus right off the bat. Gorilla Shamans love when you bring them flowers. So anyway, and my opponent has no play. So you didn't really have a super significant play here. Even if you had paradoxical outcome, it would just be the world's, like, it would be a terrible inspiration is what it would amount to. And because he's running Seed of the Synad, he is super vulnerable to this hand I've got. So I'm not gonna get greedy with Dak Faden. We're just gonna go eat your seat. He tries the paradoxical outcome in response. In response to that, I'm gonna eat the Mana Crypt. So he gets to draw 1 card. And we'll Wasteland his land, and that is it. My opponent scoops. So, yeah. Game 2. He wasn't getting anywhere after that. He had a type 1 start, but I had the anti-type 1 start. So I had to triple mulligan. You saw balance fly by. That was something that I was trying out for a little while. And I keep this horrible hand, and my opponent thought seizes and makes it worse. But I just drew Mental Misstep. My opponent is missing a very key thing right now. He's missing his 3rd artifact to turn that Mox Opal on. Oh, he drew a land, and he ponders. I'm going to Mental Misstep and hope. He's down to only 3 cards, as am I. So I'm hoping to keep him pinched on mana. And if I can keep him suppressed, well, it's getting crazy now. I'm not going to force that. I'll save it for something a little more meaningful. And now it's getting really, really bad. And I believe at this time, well, you saw the balance. First of all, it's not in the deck anymore or the sideboard. And I try to force this. I win the battle there, but I'm going to lose the war. Draw Mental Misstep at the wrong time. So I actually upped the mana count, and it's been a lot stronger since. This deck just has to hit land drops every turn, and at this point I just give up. Way too many turns without land drops, and just nothing I could do there. So we move into game 3. So again, my sideboard was a lot weaker at the beginning of the night than it is now, but here's a very keepable hand. I'm not going to get Ancestral on turn 1, and I was also trying stuff with, and you'll see it come up, I believe, in one of these games. I was playing around with Chains of Mephistopheles as a sort of transformational sideboard, with the idea being that you could still run Fact or Fiction and dig through time, but I would. Okay, so we're fighting a little battle over Thoughtseize, which I win, but I would be able to. All right, so because I drew Red Elemental Blast, I'm going to pause for a minute, or I'm going to stop my Strip Mine action. When it goes for Time Walk, that's going to get red blasted because it gives me a ton of tempo here to be able to, and then look at this draw. I draw Disenchant. So now I get to Demonic Tutor for Black Lotus into double Disenchant. Ba-boom. Locked and loaded. All right, you got a Mox Opal against an empty hand here. So anyway, the point I was trying to make is that I was trying out Chains of Mephistopheles, and the idea was, so Fact or Fiction, I have no idea why, but it's unrestricted. It used to be restricted. In my day, Fact or Fiction was restricted, and I'm just going to let this game run while I talk. But now that it's not, you could actually build a Chains of Mephistopheles. So I have this idea for a Type 1 deck that I really want to try out, but I'm starting with the deck, and then I will play around with some other ideas. The idea is, and I kind of got this from seeing Keep Flying use chains in a deck that he was playing earlier. But the idea is Chains of Mephistopheles Dak Faden. You target the opponent. So they have to discard two cards. They discard and draw, then discard, then discard. That's the effect. So it's a nasty like way to keep your opponent completely locked down. If they draw a card, like and say they have no cards in hand due to the interaction, and then they draw Ancestral Recall to get their way out of it. Well, they can't because Chains is in play. There's no getting out of it for your opponent unless they're playing cards like you're playing. So you run, of course, everybody runs Dig Through Time, or just about everybody does. If they're playing blue, they certainly do. So that's one way to get out of it. But very few opponents are actually playing Fact or Fiction. And Fact or Fiction is not a draw effect, so you could get out of it that way. There's also cards like Flash of Insight and a few others that you could use that could take advantage of it. So anyway, my opponent, we have a rematch here, so this is, and I think I'm like kind of slowly tweaking the deck as we go. So anyway, that was an idea for a deck I had, but getting all the components together, like multiple Dak Fadens, Chains, Fact or Fictions, not quite there yet. I had to complete this deck first. So anyway, my opponent tinkers into a Force of Will, which he knows about due to a Thoughtseize, I think. Oh no, maybe he did not know about it. I take that back. Anyway, but I do get to, yeah, he forced with a Ponder earlier. So I guess he did know about it because I attempted the mental misstep his Thoughtseize. He forced back and then took my mana drain and left me with the Force of Will. So very strange stuff going on here. Anyway, I DT here, and I go fetch Dak Faden. I have exactly enough mana to play Dak Faden and snag a Seat of the Synod and pass. I love all these artifact lands my opponent seems to be playing. Very helpful for me. All right, so I'm going to keep Gorilla Shaman, but I'll keep him tucked up my sleeve for now. It's a little bit risky here, because if he gets Voltaic Key and Time Vault, if he gets TV Key, then I would be like keeping the Disenchant would have been stronger. So I don't know if this was necessarily correct. It might have been better to do the other thing, but between Dak and Gorilla Shaman, it was going to probably quickly get out of hand anyway. So my opponent just scoops there, and that's fine with me. All right, so this hand is not really, it has no early defenses, but it has a lot of potential. And my opponent leads off with a Tellurian Academy, so I'm extremely gratified that I have the Wasteland in my hand. And I drew the misdirection, so I thought about maybe just camping 5 mana, but that just doesn't make any sense because I need to take out 2 islands over there with 1 shot. That makes a lot more sense. All right, so really all I want to draw here is a blue card, and of course I just get a land. Because if I could draw a blue card, then I know that I could misdirect Hardcast and then Force of Will, or vice versa. But I didn't, and when my opponent Ancestral is here, I already know it's going to fail, but I'm going to try anyway. You just know it sometimes. Yep. And man, if I had a blue card, that would have been a backbreaker. Okay, well, something went wrong here. Are we going to bug out? We're bugging out. Well, that's unfortunate. Yeah, because clearly I wouldn't have been able to. All right, well, I have to apologize. That one just bugged out, but I did manage to win it. I guess that's good to know. All right, so we played one more round, and then I moved on to other opponents. Best of 3 set. Didn't really discuss it, but it just ended up that way. He's got another nuts hand. He actually plays the Chrome Mox without imprinting, so that tells me he's setting up for a paradoxical outcome. Of course, I have another Gorilla Shaman hand. Ancestrals. This is really bad. But I get to do some type 1 things on my own. First turn, I'll take a second turn. All right. Ooh, I drew a Disenchant. So I'm actually going to Disenchant Mana Vault rather than play Gorilla Shaman and go Munching, because that actually turns off, it makes it extremely hard for him to use his Mox Opal. Now I get a Wasteland, and I'll pass again. I'd rather hit his blue. Opal's usable over there, but not very. All right, let's go for Shaman, and that's it. My opponent scoops. So, of course, if he didn't scoop, we munch on an Opal and a Lion's Eye Diamond and pass. Then he's got a Chrome Mox that does nothing. And then on the next turn, Crucible Worlds Strip Mine comes on board, and that is it. So So paradoxical outcome, not much of a problem for this one. Now here's the one I lost. Having said that, I played Cyclone here, and well, you'll see I don't have the best luck in these games. Well, this is an interesting opening hand, so I decided, I don't know what I'm facing. So I misread, first of all, my opponent. I should have realized that he's not on shops here, but for some reason I thought he was. Well, because workshop is a little bit confusing, but here that should have tipped me off right there. So I go for Factor Fiction here, and it sticks. I take Gorilla Shaman Will. I mean, this looks pretty good, the situation that I'm in now, obviously. Oh my gosh, he is going to town. Paradoxically, outcomes, does some other mean, uncool things, and then takes infinite turns, and I die. And I mean, what could I do? Even though I thought he was on shops, there's really almost nothing I could have done differently that game other than mulligan, which is probably what I should have done. It was a fairly risky keep. All right, so I mulligan having learned my lesson, and I keep this hand here and felt pretty good about that. All right, he's got a workshop into a defense grid. We got to force that. Now, because he could make a similar play on the next turn, I'm not going to Wasteland. I want to get mana drain up. Then I can start attacking his mana. So we'll go ahead and take out the shop. And double Spire, Lotus Petal, Helm of Awakening, Mox Opal, Glint Nest, Crane. Okay, there's the card we're going to mana drain. Why? Because it's a creature that also draws cards, and I don't really want to be taking chip damage from a creature and have my opponent draw extra cards. Doesn't sound good to me. Alright, well, there's a Lotus. Plays mana for Sensei's Divining Top. A little bit strange since it's free with Helm. Probably forgot, just like I was about to do. So I Factor Fiction here, and he gives me the most insane pile ever. Yeah, I'll take Wasteland Disenchant for your Helm. Absolutely. I mean, he does get... he did draw a Workshop afterwards, but he's got a Mox Opal, it doesn't work. A Lotus Petal, it works once. There's chains that I sideboarded in. So actually in this game, where I'm running Factor Fiction here, I actually have no other way to... Alright, so anyway, well, opponent goes for Grim Monolith at the end of his turn. I'm going to disenchant. I have no way to actually draw cards. Nothing in my deck says draw a card right now. It's all, look and select type effects. Goes for a second Helm of Awakening. Try to mana drain that. Okay. Really would like a black. Now he's going for the big time with the Memory Jar. Well, mana drain that. Can I find a black mana, please? Or a Gorilla Shaman? No, but I did find a Dak Faden. So get him down, snag his Mox Opal. He does not tap it in response, which means I can then cast Chains. With Chains Dak set up on the board, my opponent scoops. He has no way to draw additional cards, and immediately I'm going to Dak him. I'm going to just Dak, and then he's dead. So move to game 3. So anyway, that's the idea, that setup, that board for the deck that I think might be very interesting for Type 1, but it'll be a while before I get there. Alright, well, let's try and stop a Voltaic Key on turn 1 because it's just too doggone risky. My opponent gets first turn Future Sight and is still playing. He's a Blightsteel Colossus on top, which is, I guess, something. Well, if I can get to turn 2... then I can get to turn 3, and then Gorilla Shaman will clean up most of my problems, and then I just need to find a Red Blast for that Future Sight. Or at least that's what I think until my opponent reveals Time Twister. At this point, it's just absurd. He Type 1'd me to death, and I scoop. So, that's how I lose. However, I then adjusted the deck, I believe, to the current build. So, no more Chains of Mephistopheles, tightened up the main... etc., etc. Yeah, this is the actual current version. My opponent's new player going ape on me. I'm going to lead off with Misty because I don't want to lead off with a wastelandable card. I need to get mana drain up. Fortunately, he does not really have anything here to do. Paradoxical outcome would be like a, really bad, draw 2 spell. So not too worried about it here. Opponent vamps. That's fine with me. And he goes for Ancestral. So we're going to try to mana drain it, see what happens. So as much as I want to get, so I'm going to pause right here. Okay, pause. As much as I would like to have gotten black there to complete my color base, I fetched up a second Tundra so that I could potentially play double. If my mana drain stuck, I would have 4 mana this turn. It did, so I can do this followed by this. And now I have mana advantage. Alright, so most of these combo decks do not play anything but Force of Will and Mental Misstep. They don't play Mana Drain. Alright, so I'm thinking here, and I decide I don't think that he's going to kill me next turn, so I throw away Force of Will and a land to Dack Fayden, keeping Mana Drain Factor Fiction. Draw a Pearl, play the Pearl, and pass. And then decide, nah, I'm going to Dack. And then I Dack into Cruise, throwing away Factor Fiction. So I go ahead and cruise up. Opponent has Force of Will. Of course, I'm doing this in my second main, so I'll have 5 mana coming next turn. Cruise into this lovely stuff here. Mana Drain Ancestral Wasteland, so I Wasteland him and pass. He plays Mox Sapphire, then thinks the better of it and gives up. I mean, it's about to be my Mox Sapphire. Yeah, on my turn, I've got 5 mana coming, an Ancestral Recall, Mana Drain backing it up. I think it was time to scoop there. Alright, so game 2. So if I'm not just completely obliterated before I can get 2 islands into play, then generally speaking, my deck seems to be favored. Opponent tries to go for a Time Walk. I Force a Will it only because I have first turn Dack Fayden and a Wasteland. So Dack, snag, waste, opponent scoops. Just like that. Of course, Mana Crypt isn't the best in my deck. It could kill me, but I'm up to 4 Disenchants and 2 Gorilla Shamans, so it's not going to kill me. Especially with a deck to fuel my digging for those cards. Alright, so that's, I type 1 to my opponent there. Alright, so we played again. And it says 1 and 1. I'm certain that I won a best of 3. I do not know why it says 1 and 1. Did we just not play again? Or I'm not sure. Anyway, I've got a great start. Anytime you have Mox Sapphire, it's generally speaking a great start. Opponent goes for Demonic Tutor. I'm going to Mana Drain that, of course, so that I can Jace. I don't see any hesitation on my opponent's part, which leads me to believe he has no Force of Will, so I go for the Jace, and he has a Force of Will. This is very unfortunate for me. Alright, so he gets Soul Ring into Paradoxical Outcome, which really wasn't that big of a deal. He drew 2 cards. So I'm still feeling pretty good here. I do need to get an artifact, though, so I can turn on Dig Through Time. Thirst. Now I'm not feeling too good. He thirsted away a Chrome Mox. Okay, so I drew Academy. That allows me to dig. Let's go for it. Another Force. Very brutal. I've drawn 0 Force of Wills to his 2 so far. Alright, so he's got Trinket. Normally he'd probably get Soul Ring here. Or Sensei's Divining Top. His hand must be pretty good. Memory Jar, yeah, it's pretty good. Oh, there's a Force of Will, but we're in the middle of a Memory Jar turn. Alright, so he Hercules. I let that happen only because I can now force his Soul Ring, which makes more sense to me. And then he Time Twisters, which is funky. But hey, I traded a Soul Ring for a Ruby, and that seems pretty good. Dump hand. Ooh, top decking if I can find red or any artifact. Turn on my Opal. So I am not playing Mox Opal, you may note. And this was the game that told me exactly why you should not play cards that don't always work in a deck that isn't dedicated to combo. Of course, right here I did get Crucible, so I now have an active Opal. And I fetch my Volcanic, of course, hoping for something to happen, and the third Force of Will from my opponent comes down. Rough. Alright, so he's untapping a Mana Vault. I'm just hoping he plays Sensei's Divining Top or Ancestral Recall, which is a very weird feeling to have. Please, Ancestral, Mr. Opponent. Oh, hey, speaking of Ancestral. Is that how this game went? Are we going to bug out? I think we're going to bug out. There is absolutely 0 chance that I did not Merchant Scroll for Ancestral and immediately Ancestral right there. Alright, well, this is super buggy because First of all, I did lose that game. Eventually, he drew Paradoxical Outcome before I could draw Counterspell. And then second, I know I didn't draw Scroll there. And then secondly, I am certain that I won the third game, which is mysteriously gone. Sorry. I don't know. It's Magic Online. Very strange stuff. All right, so here's a new opponent for the last round. Now this, I had thought that the last version was the correct version, but the last version had Mox Opal, so clearly it was not. All right, so my opponent's got first turn Night's Whisper. That's pretty gnarly off of that insane fast mana start. But I'm going to snag his Soul Ring, and we'll see what happens with the first turn Dak Faden. All right. Wow, that's a nice start for me. So let's Wasteland his land over there. Let him flip his coin for Mana Crypt and then disenchant that sucker. Look at that. Opponent had a crazy start. My hand was just as good. Alright, so he repeals his Soul Ring, but of course I have Mental Misstep, so I can tag it on the way down. No, I guess this wasn't the current version either. It has a Mox Diamond in it. At some point, we're going to get to the final version of this stack. It must be the last set. But at any rate, we're still doing good Type 1-y things here. So I'm spinning through. I'm throwing away Moxes so I can play other Moxes. My opponent has a tough think here. If he plays Soul Ring, I'm probably going to actually let it go because Mental Misstep needs to be for Ancestral Recall. I think he cruises here, or I don't know what happens because yet again Magic Online bugs out. It's so weird. Why all of a sudden all these bugs? It's very, very strange and disconcerting. It's not allowing me to make a very good video, and I do apologize for that, but we'll try. Alright, yeah, it's the last set that has the final version. Alright, anyway, so game 2, I get a Mental Misstep, a Soul Ring on turn 1, Wasteland my opponent's land, play a Pearl and Jet. I have 0 blue sources, by the way, and this game is entirely mine. Play yet another Wasteland, play yet another Waste/Strip Mine effect. I have now got Force of Will, Disenchant, 2 Strip Mines for his next 2 land plays, and my opponent just gives up, which is very reasonable because this game is over. Alright. Motzu. I thought, hey, Motzu, he must be playing Control like I am. I don't think he is, actually. But finally, we are in the final version. Oh, I didn't realize he sent me a message. Oh, maybe I did realize. Yeah, that's right. He was being cordial. Anyway, I've got the absolute stone cold nuts. First turn, Gorilla Shaman Jace. Opponent's got first turn Baby Jace. Not quite the same thing. Alright, so I zero up Jace into Soul Ring, Crucible, Scalding Tarn, sack the Tarn, and eat his Mox. And pass. No point in attacking into a 0-2. Alright, so he's doing some stuff with his Jace, and he gets a Pyroblast, which I Mental Misstep. He missteps. I allow that to happen, and then misstep the Pyroblast yet again. He Brainstorms in response. Does not find a misstep or force, and Jace is still in play. Alright, so we're going to bounce his Baby Jace. Attack him for a point of damage or do a Mental Misstep. Is very, very nice to see, especially when somebody's running main deck Pyros. Going to try a Mana Drain here on Snapcaster. Excellent, it sticks. And I find Gush. Gushing into the craziest hand ever. So I actually tuck away 2 lands, sack and fetch 1, sack and fetch another by replaying the sack land. Factor Fiction now. Opponent says, do you want Ancestral, Mox, or the other stuff? I'll take double Counterspell. I don't need Ancestral anymore. All I'd be Ancestraling for is more of the same. I go ahead and Merchant Scroll with the Mana Floating for a Mana Drain. And at this point, I think my opponent realizes that he is not going to get back in this game. All I'm digging for now is just Wasteland to put him out of his mercy. Or, put him out of his misery, rather. But, yeah, this game is absolutely over. That was the most savage Gush Jace combo, but I thought it was so cool to be able to put 2 lands away. I had a fetch land in play, and then I had a fetch land and 2 lands, right? And then I pick up the 2 lands, put put them back into my deck and then fetch them out with the fetch land twice. I don't know, I just thought that was super cool. So anyway, I was geeking out on that because it was kind of a neat thing to experience. All right, so I've got another crazy type 1 hand, and we're going to keep. Opponent's going to ponder. I'm going to minimal misstep that because he's short on cards. He had to mulligan, so this tells me he has potential weakness here. Drawing Force of Will was, of course, really good there, like it always is. So I throw away Tundra Gush because I cannot, it'll be 2 turns before I can Gush. And I feel like 2 turns is too slow. So I Force of Will a Snapcaster here. He's going for Ponder, and he forces back, leaving him with just Snapcaster Ponder. So I could take his Mox, but I drew a Wasteland here. So the first thing I'm going to do is tithe into double Tundra. And the next thing I'm going to do, I decide I'm going to DAC. And I DAC away fetch land in a Tundra and then waste his red source. And I'm just going to let him hit DAC. I don't play a Mox because I may want to discard it to deck Faden's effect. So what I'm digging for here is, oh, well, there we go. That's a good card. How about the Humility I sideboarded in? All right, so he hits DAC for 1. Plays Monastery Mentor, who does Jack All. I get to do DAC All by treasure cruising first and then discarding 2 cards for Mr. Faden there. I've got a mana drain, so I go ahead and play a second blue source rather than, I do not cast Crucible. I do not do anything that might put my situation at risk. I go ahead and play Crucible this turn, and Wasteland is white, so I don't have to worry about disenchant. I'm sitting on mana drain, mental misstep. Let's misstep the red elemental blast. He's got 1 card in hand. Still Dak Faden over there tanking for me like a champion. And I'm able to here Wasteland him, and then I throw away Force of Will and keep Pyroblast with a red untapped and cast the Abyss, which I also sideboarded in, eating a Snapcaster Mage. And at this point, my opponent gives up. But I mean, it was clearly over. I don't know if it was correct necessarily to sideboard in the Abyss rather than Moat, because if my opponent had gotten Monastery Mentor up and running prior to Humility coming down, then the Abyss would be much worse than Moat. And of course, Humility Moat is a complete lock for creatures. So I'm actually, yeah, I'm not clear on exactly why I chose to go with the Abyss over the Moat. But at any rate, it did work out. Maybe I still had the Moats as well. I'm not sure. The correct sideboard probably was just Humility Moat, leave out the Abyss. But yeah, went very well. I actually took out the 2 Gorilla Shamans and just went up to 4 Disenchants and ran it that way, plus 1 Dak Faden. And it was funny because my opponent has a Mox the whole time, and I never took the Mox. I just allowed Dak to craft my hand to an unbeatable hand. I didn't have to worry about it. Excuse me. The other thing that's funny is, I mean, how often do you throw away Force of Will, you know, when you're holding a blue card, right? But I thought it made more sense here because I couldn't see any way that my opponent could get out of this other than, I mean, he could Lightning Bolt Dak or something, but it doesn't really get him out of it. I mean, he has to draw his way out, and that means blue cards. And so I'd rather have the Pyroblast here and then potentially just untap with the Mana Drain. I just think that's a much stronger board position. And then thanks to the Abyss eating his guy, he was 1 turn behind the whole time of being able to finish Dak off. So anyway, again, as you can see, that's kind of how testing works for me, is just slowly tune as we go. And unfortunately, I didn't get shop schemes this time, and I haven't seen anyone playing Dredge at all. So I don't know how bad of a dog I am to it or what. Maybe I need more sideboard cards like I don't know, Grafdigger's Cage, for example. But for now, this is where we're at, and it does seem to be working pretty good. The double Shaman, double Disenchant thing with just a Moat to stop creatures seems to be really effective. I mean, I don't have Swords to Plowshares or Blightsteel Colossus, but for Blightsteel Colossus, like if my opponent tinkers into it, I can Moat it, I can Jace it, and I can Dak Faden it. So it's not like I'm necessarily like completely just helpless if my opponent manages to make that play. So I've kind of thought through some of this anyway. All right, well, that's all I have. I hope you had a great 4th of July if you celebrate it, and I hope you had a good one if you don't. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.